Tonight we have a return guest we interviewed in my last video. He's a scientist with a doctorate degree who understandably prefers to remain somewhat anonymous. We're going to be talking about the COVID-19 bioweapon that utilizes nanotechnology. Doug, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be back.
And what I'll do is I'll just briefly give a quick bio. I haven't done one before. My bio, I got a basic education. Then I went to S2 Safety and Intelligence and completed a security training course, and I started doing work in security. I worked for the City of Orlando Fleet Management Security. I also did a lot of event security. I did security for the DECA student trip at Resort B, Microsoft convention during the promotion of the HoloLens, Okeechobee Music Festival, YouTube Playlist Live convention, Daisy Electric Carnival, among others. In the school system, I did volunteer work as a proctor and as a reading and math mentor for elementary school students, and I also did motivational presentations for the Teach-In program. Today I'm a full-time student learning video production, investigative journalism, and spiritual science. And my question to get started is, did you hear about the FEMA pandemic drill they had about a year ago where the pandemic virus was named COVID-19?
Wow. No, I did not. I didn't hear about that. So you started off with that went over my head. I, I so they had a FEMA drill about a virus named
Oh
COVID-19.
yeah, yep. And that was
Oh,
the
that's
name of the
interesting.
virus.
Huh. Where was the drill? It was like a national thing?
Um, I I quickly looked at the information and I regret that I didn't get more of it, the details down. So,
Okay. Well, still, I mean, it's that's interesting. I have not seen that. So that would be bizarre, and there are a number of other bizarre things about this virus, um, like the the book that was written by Dean Koontz, The Eyes of Darkness, where, from my understanding of it, the book was written, I think it was 1981, and it I think the general topic of it is some type of viral outbreak, and I don't know if it ends the world. I'm not sure what the ending of the book is, but it's a virus, and the virus in the book is apparently named Wuhan 400. Um, and one of the interesting things, I mean, number one, that's sort of a strange coincidence, not 100% proof of anything, but at the time in 1981, apparently Wuhan, China was a much different place. It was, and this could be wrong. I have to admit, I haven't done a lot of research on the history of Wuhan, but I heard that it was a small fishing village at that time. So it was just an odd name to assign a virus in 1981. The coronavirus is that's the topic, and the coronavirus is a pretty scary virus. Of course, it like a lot of things has these different sides to it, and I didn't I this is the first time I've heard the FEMA side, and I guess I'm starting to maybe understand a little what that might imply based on talking to you, with some of the patterns with that in the past, which is kind of scary. But I don't know if you want to go into that yourself at some point. But I found the virus to be, assuming that, I guess that you kind of get split into two sort of main lines of thought along the virus. One being that it isn't real, and that I'm seeing, and this really isn't I'm not saying that this is true. I'm more following the idea that it is somewhat real, but I'm seeing people comment, and online and, saying that hospitals are empty and that there aren't patients there, and that it would kind of give and even back when it was first spreading in China, and it was just sort of the early reports of it happening. And I think at that time the mainstream news wasn't even really covering it. I was seeing, because I'm sort of tuned into what would be called conspiracy theories, I watch things on YouTube and other social media sites that by their nature, they're tending, I think, to kind of look for unusual stories all the time, and that's what they present to their audience. And so by watching those types of things, you sometimes do see things just as they begin that people who watch just mainstream aren't even aware of. And I can remember, I think it was late December, around there, somewhere around Christmas, maybe a little after, that it was starting to be a little bit of a story that there was a virus going on in China, and that the Chinese were saying it's just the flu, and I think they had, the story was that some of the Chinese doctors had tried to, I guess, be more vocal to the world and say there's something going on here, there's a problem, and the storyline was that the Chinese government was then, attacking them, I guess the way to put it, and trying to arrest them, trying to silence them, and trying to keep the whole story quiet. And so this is late December, and then the quarantine started, and I remember that being, to me, kind of a bizarre time, because from my recollection of it, I'm watching these news reports of a country, China, which is a large country, and it's a big industrial country now, and they were quarantining entire cities. And I think these are big cities, like Wuhan, China, I think is a very large city, and it wasn't just that city; it was whole province, or how do you say it? Whole regions of China that were being quarantine. I think I heard something along the lines of the number of people in China that at one point that were quarantined were larger than the entire US population. And so that was happening, and I'm seeing that more on these news sites that I'm watching. And then on our news sites, they're saying it's just the flu and don't worry about it. And of course, all this time, and you'd assume that, did my phone go to sleep?
No, you're still with me.
You still there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought I went to sleep.
Nope, you're still with me.
What I was gonna say is, 1 second, I don't know why.
Talking about China.
Not where it was. My iPad keeps going to sleep, and then I can't get back in the.
What it is when you're talking, I mute myself just so that there's no feedback and you sound perfect.
Okay. So yeah. Well, at that time, when there's sort of the story that this thing's spreading in China, and on our side, the news is saying, everything's fine, basically, by not really talking about it. And you have to assume that, the United States has, well, actually, I think there's a lot of intelligence agencies now. I think actually most of them are private and people don't even know their names. But the two big ones here would be the NSA and the CIA. And I know a little bit about the CIA. I'm not in the CIA, but I know a little bit about people who have been, and they they're pretty good. They have spies, I would assume, in just about every country, and probably in various agencies within the countries. And so the idea that the US government didn't realize that there was a deadly pandemic spreading in China is absurd. And during this time, there were still flights coming in and out of China and landing in New York. And that's one of the things I started first myself having a problem with. And I remember saying to my wife, they're letting this spread. They're spreading this on purpose. Everything's still open. They're still shipping products out of China. They're still allowing people to fly in and out of China, including Chinese citizens, and that went on, quite frankly, right up until all of a sudden at some point when they actually start showing up here a little bit more, then there's a total change in the government. And I think that was, so it started in late December. It started getting worse in January, and I'm trying to remember when things started to actually take a more serious tone here, but I'm thinking it was more late February or early March. And again, from my point of view, and this is before I was really thinking of anything other than the fact that it was maybe just a natural virus, but the reaction of the government to this spreading pandemic was to do absolutely nothing. And apparently they didn't shut down air traffic, and they didn't start ramping up production of ventilators, and they still haven't. And they didn't order factories here to start producing personal protective equipment, and they still haven't. They're just saying they have, but I think that's actually not true. And so it has the air of a catastrophe being created on purpose, and I guess you could say it has the air. And let's just get out right at the beginning. It has the air of a depopulation agenda to me, and that's, I'm kind of a conspiracy theorist, and most people don't think that way. And the other thing that I remember, I work around the public to some extent, and again, it was early January, late December, and I was starting to get concerned about this already, to the point of sort of thinking of changing lifestyle things myself and with people that I know, and sort of starting to want to be quarantined, and and the people in the public in general, just, I mean, it wasn't even brought up. It wasn't even a topic. It was, so people were just going about their life. Everything was normal. So I don't know how many people realize this, but it's not the case that this thing was coming and not seen, and that we just got hit by a train, and now we're dealing with an emergency crisis and a healthcare system that can't keep up with the cases. And this is along the storyline that it's a real virus. That is not what happened. There was time to do something, and there was just nothing that was done. During this whole crisis, I have not had the impression that the people of the country were, at least early on, and even at that point, that the people of the country were being protected, or that the goal of the government was to protect American lives. I think the goal at that time was more to protect the economy.
Yeah, fair
Not that
enough.
not that the economy is not important, but the point being that the economy would have been in better shape if they had shut down all international travel back when this first started, and it had never come here in the first place. And then we might still have had a hit, because it would have affected trade, and it would affect international business, I guess. But we could be in a country right now that basically didn't have coronavirus potentially. And so I find that interesting. There could be things that I'm not aware of, and reasons that I'm not thinking of, that play into this. But that was my that's how I started off looking at this virus, was that, yeah, it's a scary virus, and it looks like it's right at the beginning. But and it included the Chinese too, because they were kind of saying it's not that big a deal while they were closing down entire cities, and there were videos coming out of them welding doors shut on apartment complexes, and to be frank though, I kind of had the sense that there wasn't a whole lot of information coming out of China. It was hard to find videos of somebody walking down the street with a camera, for instance, or a conversation like you or I are having now, like that. You just wouldn't find things like that, or I didn't see things like that were coming out of China. And then the explanation would be that it's a communist country and a very top-down government, which I guess means that nothing happens unless it's approved by the dictator at the top, and that they tend to not be open, and they don't let people get on and make videos and tell tell the world what's happening. And it did have that air. So you're kind of hearing stories that there's nothing really happening while you're seeing entire cities being quarantined, and then that starts leading into stories about cremations and and on and on and on. And you see a video of like an empty city and kind of a creepy video shot of a fairly modern city like you might see here with stores and nice clothing stores and coffee shops, and it's just empty. There's not a soul in sight. And yeah, that was something I remember seeing, and it did have kind of a disheartening feel about it, like something really weird is going on. And at that time, everything here is just business as usual. So so I gave a pause so you could clip out. So I'm doing my usual thing. I'm rant on the coronavirus, on the government intention, and I'm just talking to you now, not necessarily to be recording. Are you still there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to bring the audience, because a lot of people are not familiar with this. This is stuff that is not being covered. You really have to dig deep to even hear anything related to this stuff, and you have to know where to look. It's largely suppressed. So just to bring some of the audience up to speed, information has come forward that people are mind controlled as the virus travels through the blood, carrying nanotechnology to neurotransmitters in the brain. They then control the people using supercomputers that are set up all over the world using frequency waves emitted from towers and satellites. The plan is to use COVID-19, the coronavirus, to make people cyborgs, part human, part machine, also known as biomechatronic or bionic.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah, well, there is a storyline along that context, and that's an interesting one, and it's not something that at all is talked about really. I don't even think it's really talked about much in the conspiracy theory world. And yeah, maybe if we go up to, can we go up to the first picture?
It's done.
Okay. So that the first picture is, I mean, this is sort of a cartoonish diagram, but that's a virus, and the red circle is the virus, and the little spike things that are coming off of it are different types of features. One of them being a spike protein. I guess that's what's labeled. And so the idea is that the spike protein on the virus is what attaches to a receptor, which down in the bottom of that picture, the host cell is blue, and that's an ACE2 inhibitor that, or an ACE2 receptor, I should say, that I think ACE inhibitor is a type of blood pressure medication, but the ACE receptor is what apparently this virus is attaching to. And so this is just a sort of a diagram of a virus, and inside the virus, this one is actually labeled SARS, I think, but that's still a coronavirus. It's that blue squiggly material is the RNA or DNA that the virus is holding. I think in this case it is RNA, although they're similar. They're genetic strands that the viruses contain. So basically, a virus is a genetic strand that's encapsulated and attaches to the receptors on a cell of a host, which in this case is human, and then is brought into the cell, and the virus then opens up basically, and the genetic material is taken out, and then basically the virus uses the machine in your cell to replicate its DNA. and essentially make more viruses. And so that's the picture there. And we can I'm trying to look here at we can go to maybe picture 2 and then picture 3. Those are other diagrams of the same type of thing. They're showing the general idea of a virus, which is a encapsulated genetic material, and part of what these pictures are maybe showing is that they're essentially, it's kind of like and this is simplified. I mean, this isn't an actual micron or this isn't actually an image of a virus. It's a diagram, but there's sort of an empty space inside a shell. Then the empty space has the genetic material, but potentially these could be designed in a way that there'd be something else put in that space in addition to the genetic material. And I think if you go down to
and that was picture 3.
Yeah, 3. And then if you go down to, I guess you could just jump down to 5.
Okay, we're at 5.
And 5 is sort of, this is a size scale. So at the bottom, it's showing nanometers. So virus size in nanometers. And the viruses over on the far left are basically smaller. I'm not sure, they look like they're bigger in the picture, but they're showing on the left the difficulty of killing the virus. But what I was really trying to just show is sort of the size of different viruses. And the coronavirus is on here. It's showing it at between 100 and 150 nanometers in size. So it's not the smallest virus. It's not the biggest. And I just kind of wanted to show that because we're going to talk about the idea of potentially, there being technology that's down at the size of nanometers also, and that might be connected to the virus. And so the story that and actually let me backtrack a little bit. I remember the virus starting, and I'm kind of following certain websites that are following this, and there was one guy in particular that I started watching quite a bit, I think his name's Paul Cottrell, and he has a YouTube station. And he does a pretty good job of, he has quite a bit of scientific knowledge himself. And he was, one of the early things that he pointed out, he was looking at the NIH website, and that's the website where virologists and scientists actually list basically the genetic sequencing of viruses, the base pairs, and there's lots of them. And so it's a place where researchers can go to get information, post things that they found too. And early on in this pandemic, before it was at all being covered in mainstream news, he was kind of going onto the NIH webpage, and he was following this thing, and he was one of the people that was first, I think, sort of sounding the alarm that, hey guys, this is something serious. You need to start paying attention. And that's while the rest of the country was pretty much asleep. And there was a paper that was published, and it was on the NIH website, and it was a paper that, and I don't have it here to show you, but it was written by a couple of Indian geneticists, I believe. What they were basically saying, and what he was saying, was that there was some strange genetics on the spike protein of this virus, this new COVID-19 virus, and they were basically what the story was, just to put it simply, was that they were claiming that there were segments of the genetics that looked like HIV. Not that the virus was HIV or that it was going to give you HIV, But what that meant was it started to look like somebody had taken chunks of HIV genetics and put it into this virus genetics to make it more contagious. And he was kind of talking about, well, that would start to imply that it wasn't a natural virus that came out of eating a bat, but that in fact it was a man-made virus, and that it maybe wasn't intentionally released, but that nevertheless that would imply that it was not a natural virus. And he started going into ideas of, you know, that researchers sometimes intentionally sort of supercharge viruses in the lab for the purpose of research, because somehow it enables things to happen faster and more efficiently, and they're researching some feature. And I don't fully understand that, but that was the idea that he had, was sort of that, you know, maybe this leaked out of a research facility and it wasn't intentional. And so that was interesting, because right away it was sort of this idea that this isn't just a normal virus, and it didn't have the title. Sorry, go ahead.
Has there been evidence? Because I've heard that there has been that other viruses, for example, HIV and SARS, were actually created as bioweapons.
Well, that's a good question. I've kind of lately heard that kind of thing too, and I don't really know. So I don't want to.
No evidence that
answer.
you know of, though.
Yeah, there's nothing that I know of, but that's just because I don't really know that much about that. That's not something I've looked into. I've just lately heard people kind of mention it along the lines of following this, I guess. And so, and you know, maybe maybe this would be a good time to go to the clip with I might be going out of order. The one that was the law professor that you said you liked, where he was talking about it being a bioweapon.
I think I found the smoking gun here. There was a recent scientific study published in Antiviral Research, 10 February 2020, by 3 scientists from France and 1 from Montreal, who did a genetic analysis of the Wuhan coronavirus, and they said, quote, "It may provide a gain of function of the 219 coronavirus for efficient spreading in the human population compared to other viruses." Let me repeat that. May provide a gain of function to the 2019 coronavirus for efficient spreading in the human population compared to other lineage coronaviruses. That's the smoking gun for a offensive biological warfare agent. Gain of function properties is a tip-off. It's only useful for offensive biological warfare activity, and it is typically conducted in either it's so dangerous, in either a BSL-4 or a BSL-3 facility. And there in Wuhan, you have the only BSL-4 facility in China. So I think it's clear it came out of this lab. Gain of function, it's means its DNA genetically engineered to be more lethal and more more infectious. Clearly, what we're seeing now with this coronavirus, it is basically SARS, which is already a weaponized version of a coronavirus that has leaked out of that laboratory at least twice before. And then it is given gain of function properties, which basically means it can travel by air for at least 6 feet and is more lethal. SARS lethality was about 10%. Lancet estimates here the lethality is about 15%. If you disaggregate Chinese government figures, it's about 17%. And there's a British public health authority who said he thinks it's about 18%.
right away they were talking about the spike protein and the genetics there, and this paper was put on the NIH website that was basically making the allegation that maybe this thing was man-made, and then the paper was removed apparently from the website, and it's gone, and so you can't find it there anymore. And at that point, and I'm trying to be, I'm watching these things, and it's kind of scary, but I'm trying to be level-headed, and and sort of on the one hand, I'm concerned, and on the other hand, it's like, well, Paul Cottrell's not he's not a virologist, maybe best intentions, and I actually, and then it occurred to me that it would be nice if you could listen to a video where there was a virologist with a background in bioweapons that was able to make YouTube videos, and you could hear what they thought. And I to this day have not been able to find something like that. And so you're sort of left as a citizen of either listening to the mainstream news or listening to conspiracy theory sites. And I don't see that there's a whole lot of in between. And I have just over time I've subscribed to a few scientists that publish videos that are sort of on the biochemistry of cells. And I even looked up some virologists on YouTube, and my idea was to kind of send them a message off one of their videos and say, have you seen any evidence? Have you looked at the genetics of this, and have you seen any evidence that this is a man-made or a bioweapon? And one of them actually did respond to me, and he said that yes, people have looked at the genetics, and it does not appear to be. It's just a natural coronavirus, and I felt better with that. And this is probably early January, maybe the first week, and so time's kind of going on, and I, in my search for truth, I'm watching other things and talking to other people that have nothing to do with the virus, and one person that I'm talking to is kind of telling me about the idea of mind control, and of there basically being the technology to control people's thoughts and control their behavior. And he recommended.
Did you say behavior there? Cut out for a second. You said thoughts and behavior. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that there's technology being developed that has the potential to modify and influence people's thoughts and behavior remotely. In other words, that they could make you hear voices, or have hallucinations, or make you be more aggressive, or make you feel pain. That could be done through basically energy frequency waves. I don't know exactly what type, but in other words, invisible energy waves like microwaves and cell phone waves, that basically energy like that could be used to direct in a directed way to, and I'm saying that this is sort of what I understand the idea to be. I don't know that it's true, but the allegation is that there are programs out there that are actually not only being developed, and maybe already have been developed, and that maybe this technology is a lot further along than just the beginning stages. And so my thought is to now go to the clip with what's his name? I keep forgetting his name. The clip where he's talking about the clip with Robert Duncan, and I can give you the timing, but there's a point where.
And just to clarify, for the audience, I think we might have made a small mistake last interview we did. We might have said by mistake Peter Duncan, and of course we were talking about Dr. Robert Duncan.
Yes, thank you. You're right. I did say Peter because I was trying to remember his name, and I'm horrible.
And
So yeah,
while I'm on the subject, and I'm still recording here for a moment, I wanted to ask you, now is he? Am I correct in my understanding that he CIA also?
well, it's a good question, and that's how some of the videos are titled. So my understanding of it is that he has been a contractor for the CIA, that he has worked on scientific programs for them and for the Defense Department and for DARPA. Um, I'm not, I don't know what, his status is of employment, but my understanding is that he's a physics professor who specializes in artificial intelligence, and he calls himself a whistleblower, and he basically gives lectures where he talks about technology that is oftentimes used to control people's thoughts, and one of the examples is apparently there's a project called the Voice of God project, which was apparently employed in the Iraq War, at the first Iraq War, and that they can basically make people hear voices in their heads and say, lay down your weapons, and the people think it's God, so that's why it's called the Voice of God. And and apparently that can be a pretty powerful tactic. And so this professor is sort of telling people these things under the guise that it's potentially really bad for humanity. And that, I think he would say that he was, trying to help advance humanity technologically, and through that he'd been working on these cutting edge top secret programs, but that his warning sort of is that, this stuff actually looks like maybe they're using it in some pretty bad ways. And so these people, this person was recommended to me, another gentleman talking to, this gentleman was sort of also promoting the idea that there actually is an agenda to basically use technology to make you, like you said, essentially a cyborg, and to be able to control you in from a distance through what could be called mind control, and there are other names for it. And so Peter Duncan is or I just said Peter again. Robert Duncan is the professor that was recommended, and he is discussing this idea, and he has a couple of videos, and some of them being interviewed by people who are talking about specific cases. But yeah, the idea is that they are creating mind control. And then actually in the video, and I'll kind of direct you to where it is, there's a gentleman that asks him a question, and that gentleman is actually, I've seen that person in other videos of his own where he talks about black goo, which is supposed to be like an oil-like material that is essentially nanotechnology. And the person's asking him in the audience, the person watching Robert Duncan give a speech asked the question, where this person basically alleges that he thought mad cow disease was actually the intelligence community's researching self-replicating nanotechnology, and that and then I think he things about that. So the allegation was that they've actually sort of started doing this stuff, and that there was this previous disease that was out there called mad cow disease, which I don't hear about that much anymore. But years back, that was another kind of scary thing that was out there in the news. And I think another name for that is spongiform encephalitis. It basically turns your brain into mush. And the official story behind that was things called prions, which are those are amino acids, and that they have a prion is an amino acid that has a certain shape, basically, and how it's three-dimensional shape and how it folds, and that it can corrupt the other amino acids in your brain, and that it basically had this unusual fold that it had, and that once if it got into your brain, then they would start making all the other molecules in your brain start to fold like that, and that would essentially make the structure fall apart. And that, that's a scary idea. And I know that prions are scary because they're not actually alive, and they're very hard. You can't kill them because of that. Very hard to destroy. So some of the sterilization processes that are traditional in hospitals, even in the operating room, necessarily get rid of them. And I actually remember that, years back, there was a story of a person that had surgery done in a hospital. Person ended up dying of spongiform encephalitis, although apparently there's a genetic form that isn't contracted, and that ended up being what they said he had. But the operating room that had worked on him apparently just threw out everything. And and there was already back then there was perception of how do you sterilize it. Well, if it has a prion on it, you might not be able to remove it. And so that was the story of mad cow disease, the official one. And the person that was asking the question was sort of making allegation that, well, the actual thing that was going was deep state research with self-replicating nanotechnology.
You're cutting out a little bit. It sounded like you said it was deep state research with self-replicating technology.
Okay, yeah, you got really loud all of a sudden. It's like that on your end. So yeah, you want to just keep going?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and so that was the implication, and so these are little pieces of the puzzle that I'm giving. I mean, it might not make sense now. And then I had another clip that.
Well, let me go ahead and play that one for the audience before we get into the next one, and just to make sure we're on the same page. So he's allegedly a CIA whistleblower. It looks like I might be starting to lag a little bit. Hopefully my audio isn't cutting out. And is it a fact that he studied under Professor Noam Chomsky at MIT?
Yes, that's what he states.
Okay. All right, so we're going to play that clip now for the audience.
AI in the metal attack architectures are what my current research is about. The AI in the metal attack is a feed-forward neural network. It tells the other network what function it is to do by altering the biases of the neurons. It learns the difference of networks and compensates the signal. The MEG and EG at that time flatlines in their differences, and hence the term cloning is referred to, although that's not really the function that they're doing to alter the other network. The theory of consciousness is that the same function gives rise to the same consciousness. And you can see it in the fidelity factor during the experiments is retained above 98% in most simulations. The AI could be another biological entity, but it is more difficult to scale the weapon system with an army that large, and that's why we're using AIs. Always remember, with knowledge comes great responsibility. You actually know how to take over the world now.
But all I am saying is beware. So, for example, I'm going to say something controversial. I love crop circles. I think they're just beautiful art. And the effort to make them is incredible. But I happen to have known a few gents back in America that were engineers and artists, and they built a machine that was all automated, GPS run, They would do the design, and they built a 10-mile crop circle in Nevada. You could only see from airplanes or satellites. And it was gorgeous, it was gorgeous. But I was impressed by the engineering. I don't know if they're real or not. So I love mystery and wonder, and all that gives us, I think, as humans, we want hope. We want to think we're not alone. Somebody will save us from ourselves. And so kind of in closing, is this the end of humanity or a beginning of a new species? Many believe that transhumanism will be the end of the human race. I kind of, disagree with that. Perhaps it's just a redefinition of what the human race is. What if we are the mothers and fathers of a better species than our own? Perhaps we can amplify love and happiness, end all wars. Perhaps the new world will be more perfect than what we have now. I don't think we should be scared. We should embrace the future and understand the consequences. Questions?
The mad cow disease, because of...
Oh, okay, that was you,
Yeah, it was
yes.
me, sorry. I don't know how far you are into the research of the disease itself.
You know more than I do.
Okay,
Yeah.
if it's okay for you, I will just fill in the facts, because the transmitting agent was crystalline. They burned it at 800 degrees, injected it into the brain of the next animal, and it still transmitted the disease. So what is transmitting is the barium strontium, the piezo crystal.
Not necessarily. Now, remember, a prion is a protein. It's not a virus. It's not a bacteria.
Yeah,
it's a protein that self-replicates, and it's immune to high temperatures. So you can't cook the meat, and that won't get rid of it.
The prion goes away at 800 degrees. Only the
Okay,
crystalline,
all right.
800.
Yeah,
800.
that
This
sounds
is
about right.
only ash.
Yeah, right.
And they managed to transmit it at 800 degrees, introducing the ash of the brain of an infected animal into a healthy animal. This is one part.
Okay.
The protein prion chain appears when the nervous system is dissolved, because the mercury is stripping the nerve, and the lack of copper is dissolving the nerve. So basically this is dissolved nervous tissue that recombines with other heavy metals that are available to rebuild an artificial.
What made you think it was smart dust, or?
Just from the geometry, if you have a new core, like a piezo crystal forming the center of a neuronal...
What causes the holes in the brain?
Then the nervous system regrows. Instead of copper prion protein, it goes barium prion protein chain. And this connects to the piezo crystal. So we have an antenna system that is spitting out electrons on command by radio signals, and introducing the electric signal into the animal-owned nervous system. So this is exactly the concept when you go into YouTube and you look for concepts of self-assembling nanobots.
So what's the cover-up? Why are they covering that research?
I don't know what they try to do. I guess it was an experimentation how far the system affects the health. Because what they did is they had a mandatory vaccination with a gelate that pulled out the copper of all the cows. And this is where the disease started. The lack of copper started the disassembling of the nervous system. And having a completely senseless mandatory vaccination causing this pandemia of mad cow disease looks like experimentation to me. Sorry, it's just the setting looks like. I don't have internal information who did it, and the piezo crystals come via the chemtrails. It's the main compound of chemtrailing is the barium strontium titanate.
Wouldn't that affect humans as well?
The mad cow disease is Creutzfeldt-Jakob in the human fields, and the other old age disease Just
Alzheimer's.
don't take on barium and strontium, they take on lead, that it's ALS, so they take on aluminum, then you have Alzheimer and dementia. So basically all the old age disease look like a side effect of this dust used as
Interesting
dust
theory. Yeah.
It's all in the papers. The biochemistry is fitting 100%.
All right, I'll
And
research
the cure
that
we
further.
developed on top of this is working 100%. So I guess there must be something to it. The only thing we don't have is if anybody in the, let's say, civil domain research is aware of what is happening over there. And I would really like to connect to those people. If you have connection into the research, do us all a favor.
All right, good comment.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Anyone else? Lady over here.
I was just wondering if you could speak more on the allowing supernatural forces going through the fiber optics and the coast cables.
What I said about bluing through the fiber optic cables?
I just saw on the screen, you said something about allowing a mixture of supernatural forces that could come through the fiber optic cables.
Oh, yeah, I'm not sure if I said that exactly.
Oh, I think there was something I think it was the last slide maybe. It said something like that. Yeah, the last point right there.
Oh, yeah, there it is.
Just wondering if you could maybe elaborate.
No, but see, this is supposed to be deception. This is a project to make people believe that supernatural forces are going through their television or through the cables. So, yeah, there's no science behind it.
Thank you. Gentleman over here.
Yeah, can you elaborate on hyper game theory and so-called walking people to their death?
Okay. Yeah, so hypergame theory came out of a professor at Dartmouth, obviously funded by the Air Force and DARPA, and etc., all the acronyms. And it came from a man that died recently, a brilliant man named John Nash, who, there was a movie made about him called The Beautiful Mind, and he was a mathematician who won a Nobel Prize, and he created game theory, which is used in economics as well as war theory. Now, it relies on rational players, so you run these simulations. What will China do if we make this move? What is the game, the war game going on? Or you can use it in business, similar process. Hypergame theory is one level above of that abstraction, that you don't know what game they're going to play. So they use it in cyber warfare, mostly. And attackers, hackers, they'll use several different techniques. But the defenses, the administrator and the virus protection, they don't know what game these hackers are using. So they create a probability matrix over the period of the time of sampling all the different kinds of hacks they get. Now you can apply this to other aspects of life. The way that I was using it is they're trying to, it was called mind hacking. So they're trying to hack a targeted individual, and the targeted individual will create mental defenses as best as they can. They'll go to their social networks. Well, what do? They try to disrupt the social network, so you have no family or friends. It's a back and forth game that they're trying to find out the maximum probability of death, and the example that you used, where you'll commit suicide or you'll harm somebody, become a Manchurian candidate, or something like that. So it's huge database of probabilities across all the variations of mind. The human genome, I think we have, I'm going to get this wrong, so I'm not even going to say it, but a finite in the hundreds of thousands of different genes across our species. and we mapped them out in the Human Gene Project. Well, now it's the Human Mind Project, the Global Brain Project. You know, President Obama just recently funded a whole bunch of scientists to decipher the mind. Well, our previous president, same thing, George Bush, said the same thing. They're trying to decipher every possible thought and uniqueness due to culture and language and whatnot.
Thank you. Another one, please. So, Matthew, we're just going to have a reply from this gentleman.
Yeah. Well, if there's no accountability or transparency in the development of all of this, how is it possible to have a positive outlook on this topic and humanity?
Oh, that's such a difficult question. I guess keep pressuring your government for transparency. But scientists, I'm a scientist, and while we may have our personal ethics and our personal beliefs and be moral people as an individual, we don't think of science as evil. We're brainwashed into believing everything we're doing is for the benefit of mankind. But look who pays our bills. It's all military, it's all for war, it's all for control, government control. So yes, you should be dubious. I don't think you should be depressed because there are a lot of great possibilities out there, especially if there's a technology transfer from the military to the civilian sectors. We'll see a lot of businesses that will feed our desires and needs. Yeah, I wish I had a better answer, but yeah, it's scary.
I've got a quick question. Just to confirm, you said you were a little bit embarrassed, ashamed that you'd worked on a project called The Voice of God.
Yeah.
And to your understanding, it had been used in the Iraq War, but you worked on it. Can you tell us what the name of the project in the military as it was being developed was and how much was spent on it?
Oh, no, I wasn't interested in budgets or names. But the nickname was Voice of God. But it goes under a lot of different names, different variations. And so let me talk about some of the technology. It's called the microwave hearing effect, which with directed microwaves, this was discovered by a guy named Frey, and they're not totally sure what the mechanism is, but they hypothesize that the brain expands ever so slightly with this energy, heat energy, that gets conducted to the inner ear. There are several other technologies that use ion cyclotron resonance heating or calcium C2+, as a mechanism of influencing the nervous system. And all the ions have their different resonances under the Earth's magnetic field. And and then you can go into the ultrasonic realm where anybody in the beam with one of the ultrasound waves won't hear anything. It's above human hearing. But where the waves intersect from two different directional sources, all of a sudden that person hears it, and that's called the audio spotlight. So there are a lot of mechanisms to project voices into people's heads. Yeah.
Thank you.
So the idea is kind of being discussed with Professor Duncan, the idea of mind control and the idea that there's technology that's already been developed that is far beyond what the average person would even probably imagine was possible. Again, I've heard stories before about what are called targeted individuals, which I think is a way to say that it's somebody that somebody is targeting. I guess it would be somebody like the CIA or the NSA or the shadow government, that there's some powerful entity targeting these people and sort of trying to destroy them or make them go crazy or cause them to become violent. And I never really, and again, to me, just to be honest, that I'm not saying this is right, but my reaction to that was always, that's kind of silly. that's again, that's a conspiracy theory. That's not true. They're not targeting people, but this professor, after you listen to some of his information, you start to then, at least I started to then entertain the idea that maybe there really is stuff like that anyway. Whether or not it's being used on particular people, I don't know. But so I had started listening to another website along these same lines, the same general topic, and that's where there was a statement made that had to do with the coronavirus. And so this is all kind of going on, over time. At the same time, it starts with an outbreak that looks like it's really happening, and you're seeing news reports from China and a quarantine, and I'm seeing our country basically not take it seriously, and then it starts kind of spreading, and it starts to become something that's in the news here, but it's sort of just a side story, and then they go on and talk about the NFL and normal stuff, and for the most part, all Americans are going about their daily lives like nothing's wrong, and the kids are going to school, and I'm talking to people that have kids, and about, well, is it safe to go to school, and I remember it coming up with people then, and my opinion was, well, by the time they tell you that you can't go to school, there's already going to be kids and people in the school that have it. Like right away, it was having the tone to me of everything official was way behind what was actually happening. In other words, by the time they tell you to stay home, you probably already have been exposed to it. And
Well, thank goodness it
but it,
doesn't seem to hurt children, small
yeah,
children too much.
you're right. You're right. You're
What's the
right.
youngest case that you've heard? For me, it was 19.
Well, apparently there was an infant in America that passed away. I think that was on today. So there are younger cases, but they're less common. Apparently, it looks like it's true that the high levels of fatality are in the people. Basically, the older you get, the more at risk you are, and also apparently if you have underlying health problems, it makes you more at risk. So if you, which doesn't mean that you're gonna have really serious problems, but that you have a higher chance. But the flip side is you'll see stuff out there that seems to totally contradict that too. So I'm still not 100% sure what the truth is and what's going on. And that was kind of the conversation you and I had before we started recording this. Is there are other cases of things that happen, some people have the idea that the whole thing was fake and that it was staged, and that then it's followed up by something else that's real. And I don't necessarily think that that's what's going on here, but it does sort of have the air. I think the whole thing, the whole virus, and the global quarantine. I mean, it is strange. It's a strange thing, and it maybe totally makes sense to quarantine everybody, but it is strange. And so here we are with this super advanced country and the most advanced military in the world, and we don't have things out there that are able, for instance, to test people for antibodies to this, because theoretically there would be people that have already been exposed to this, maybe without knowing it, and then they've recovered and they have antibodies, so they're not as likely to get it. And if you're able to identify who they were, those people could be used more effectively in risky positions because they'd be less at risk. So, it's just, things like that aren't being done. And so it has the feel of tremendous underpreparedness to me, almost to the level of being intentional. And that was another thing I didn't throw in here, but actually when Trump was elected, one of the first things he did was dismantle all the pandemic response teams and the Homeland Security and the Defense Department. So those departments don't even exist anymore. And, that was done through the idea of budget cuts. And it turns out that whether or not that
Interesting.
would have, yeah, whether or not that would have made a difference in this, I don't know. But that's fact. And you can
I
Google
didn't
it
know
and
that.
pull it. Yeah. Yeah. And that you wouldn't necessarily care about that much. And it has the same feel of like dismantling the Environmental Protection Agency during global warming, which also happened. and installing soundproof rooms in the EPA and making the employees there sign what they call them, non-disclosure agreements, basically top secret security agreements. So there's all kinds of strange stuff, and in a way it kind of plays into this virus. So now this is going on, and everybody's sort of staying in their house, and there's apparently something spreading, and then I'm watching these different people, and that's where so I've already kind of seen that there's the idea that maybe this is a bioweapon that was made with the intent of being an offensive weapon, and that maybe even then it wasn't intentionally released. I mean, I guess hypothetically there could be an accident, and there is apparently a level 4 bio lab in Wuhan, China, and what that means is that, from my understanding of it, and when they work with things that are really, really dangerous that have the potential to be a pandemic like this, viruses in particular, or bacteria, things that can be used as biological weapons, they have to use them under, these pretty rigid protective protocols, like, negative air pressure. And I mean, that's where they literally do have like gloves that go through the glass that you stick your arms into, and the scientist is wearing like a space suit, and the whole place has negative air pressure, so if anything got leaked out, it would be, sucked away from the person. And theoretically there's a lot of protective mechanisms to make sure that there isn't an accidental release of something, but there is a lab, and that's the highest level of that I'm aware of there being. In other words, a level 4 biolab works with the most dangerous organisms known on Earth, and there is a level 4 biolab, and it's about a block away from the fish market in Wuhan, which is where the news claimed that this all started. And that was the other thing.
I've been hearing a lot about that Wuhan lab.
Yeah, yeah, that yeah, that has become.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Do you get the sense that this is a psyop in the sense that, or a partial psyop in the sense that they're exaggerating the severity, or do you think this virus is as contagious and deadly as they are saying?
Well, that's a good question. I'm trying to think of how to answer that. I don't necessarily get the sense that it's not dangerous. That has never really been my thought. That I would advise people to take this seriously and assume that it's a really deadly virus. My sense has been that the virus is far worse than it's been given credit for. And I saw a little clip the other day, and I don't know for sure, it was on one of the places, and it showed, this is something you're not seeing on mainstream news, and I don't know that it's real, but it was allegedly inside a family's apartment in China, in Wuhan, and the whole family was dead. The kids, the baby, the mom, the dad, laying around in different places on the floor.
Do you personally know anyone? I know that's kind of a personal question, though. Or
okay.
of anyone that has gotten it. I personally don't, and I see people's hours have been cut. But other than that, you go out and you see people almost like it's like a normal world.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I don't. But then again, you wouldn't necessarily. And with a virus, because you can't see it, and and with 40, with this virus, that theoretically 40% of people who have it don't have any symptoms, and they're just spreading it without even knowing they're sick. So by the time by the time it spreads enough that people are at the point where most people know someone, I think that time is still coming. The curves, in other words, and I could send you one of those. I don't know if I did. But in terms of the models of when the most cases of coronavirus, when the peak numbers will hit the United States, it's always been out there in May, June, even maybe into July.
Well,
So the
there are
worst.
estimates. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, there are
Well,
estimates that are suggesting that at some point, when this is all said and done, up to half the population will be infected by this thing.
yeah, you get all these different estimates, and that's part of what I'm saying to you, I guess, is that they've been wrong about everything so far, and their general pattern is that what they say, the truth is far worse, and that. But you're right. That depends on whether or not you believe it's a virus. But according to the numbers and how this looks, so initially it was spreading in China, and the government was doing nothing, and the news wasn't telling you anything, and then when it started being a bigger story, the government started saying, oh, it's kind of like a bad flu. And everybody was walking around saying, oh, yeah, it's a bad flu. And if somebody coughed on you, they'd say, oh, don't worry, I just have a cold. And so there's this total lack of seriousness. And now they're the same people and they're telling you, oh, it's probably going to be 200,000. So my point is, if it follows the same pattern, that ought to scare you, because it means that what they're saying is wrong, and it's always an exaggeration in the direction of making it sound better than it actually is. What I would say is, look at how the world is acting, and every country just about in the world is locking down their citizens, shutting down their economy, stopping their businesses. There is something that is scaring people in power all over the world. And what would do that?
And I also hear that gun sales have risen. People
Yeah.
are preparing for possible tyranny or anarchy.
Guns and toilet paper. I guess you can clean your gun with the toilet paper law.
As far as you know, can the nanobots spread from person to person, infecting the brain for mind control, independent of a virus, or do they need a virus?
Well, let's get, so I kind of got off topic again. So let me get back into the nanobot. So the idea that I ran into was this particular gentleman, and what he said, it was very black and white. He actually had a video that was good where he was talking to the camera, but that's been removed, I think, by him. He tends to recycle his videos, and he has another one that I think I sent you where it was in text, basically the same thing. And it basically said, what he said was that the Wuhan virus is not a pandemic at all. That this is a controlled release, meaning that they're basically spraying it in different places on purpose all around the world, and that
Using
and
like
that
chemtrails techniques or through nanobots?
no, well, I don't know, but the implication basically would be that they're trying to spread it to everybody, and that that it didn't just start in Wuhan and spread, but that there's other places where they've released it at the same time, and you just wouldn't know it. So it could be like, somebody walked in New York City and threw a vial of it on the ground too, and then they went to San Francisco and broke a vial open, and then they went to Singapore and broke a vial open, and the news would say that it's just spreading, but that his interpretation would be, no, they made sure that it spread everywhere and fast. And that what he says is that this virus is a viral delivery of nanoparticulates, and that the and before I forget and get too into the nano part, he basically said that it's planned to not only spread, and he said the plan is to basically infect the world population, but that at least most people, but they want to infect everybody, and that it's planned to at the same time collapse the world economy and also impregnate all human beings with self-replicating, self-assembling nano blockchain scaffoldings of nanoparticulates that accumulate mostly in the central nervous system at the synapses of your neurons. And that once in place, these nanoparticulates can then be activated, if you will, or they can basically send signals to your neuron receptors to do something. And what that is, I don't exactly know, but that with certain directed energy frequencies that they can be activated, and that he said there were mobile access level quantum computers basically that had been positioned, hundreds of them or thousands of them all over the world, to basically be within signal distance of all the human population, and to the once everybody has this nanotechnology in them, they will then be able to have a computer or a technology link directly to your neurons. And so what he seemed to be implying was that part of what will happen is that there will be a fully digital economy, and that your money and your credit record and everything will be part of this nanotechnology, and so it'll be inescapable for you because it's in your body, and that through that you'll pay for things, and they'll collect debt from you, and and so it can be sold as a really great advancement to humanity, that it'll make life so much easier, and that you won't have to deal with cash, and blah blah blah. And I don't fully understand, and that does sort of have the air of China, and cities like what's it called, is it Shenzhen? I'm pronouncing it wrong, but it's where they have a fully digital economy. So they'll use their cell phone to buy things, like by taking a picture of a barcode, like even if it's a fast food restaurant, everything's done that way. They don't use cash. You can't use credit cards. It's all done digitally. And the downside of that is that the Chinese in that city have a social credit score. The government follows everything they do. They know what your political affiliation is. They know what your sexual orientation is, and what your fantasies are. I mean, it has potential to know everything that you do, and it has potential maybe to even know your thoughts. And in addition to that, you can imagine a point at which, and I have thought of this before, any of the virus stuff, at which you get to a point where there's a fully digital economy, and let's say that you have problems with your job, and you lose your job, and financial issues, and they shut off your chip, so to speak, and so you have no money, and then you're dying and you're homeless, and you try to go into a grocery store to steal a banana, and you can't even walk in the doors of the grocery store because they'll only open if there's money on your chip. And so then you pass away on the side of the street, and a robot coroner shows up and picks up your body and grinds it up to turn it into dog food, and then they'll put the bill for that robot taking your body away onto your family member's chip. And so it's a system where you have no ability to protest, and you really are totally enslaved. And the idea I touched on earlier was that it also might affect your soul, and that it might actually be doing more than just these earthly evils and advancements, but it might actually go beyond that. And in terms of your question of whether you could pass this nanotechnology on, I mean, that's a good question. I don't know, but his idea
independent of the virus, I was wondering, because that would I'm kind of going somewhere with that. It's just, I'm trying to see if their main goal is the mind control, or if we're population reduction, or both.
Right.
It looks like both.
Maybe both, yeah. Well, potentially, yeah. And so then again, you calling 4D chess stuff that starts to almost have, if it's true, it starts to feel like something like, how could a person have thought this up? And so it starts to have the feel to me of there's a non-human intelligence involved in it. I mean, it is super smart, but yeah, potentially they would be achieving population reduction, digital currency transition, and impregnating you basically with an RFID chip that you can't see, all without you knowing it. And that what lays on the other side is a smaller world population that is completely controlled digitally. And the tone of the story always sort of is part of the problem with it, is that it's implied that there's a small group of people who aren't under that, who are outside of it and aren't monitored and aren't controlled, and they're the ones controlling you. And
we'll be getting into that a little more as we move forward in the interview as well.
Yeah.
Can you
So
describe
that,
the mobile platform that you mentioned before we go too much further? Or
well, that I don't know the details of. I mean, he was talking about, the point being that he's talking about computers that can do, again, it would be implied that the technological advancement is far beyond what the public realizes, and that some of the computers that, these supercomputers that they have are able to do trillions of or billions of calculations a second, and just able to do amazing amounts of processing, and so that
would,
it
would these
so
be the computers that are controlling the nanobots, or the ones within? Because the nanobots themselves are
uh
computerized.
I'm sorry, yeah, no, I think the implication would be, um these are outside, so these are he's kind of, it sounds like he's implying that these are like the back of a truck, and or some of them maybe are stationary in a building, but that
Like an
they're
NSA
mobile.
surveillance vehicle, for example.
Yeah, something like that, and that they can be moved around and put in places so that there's a distribution of them all over the planet. And it would have the air of there having to be a global coordination behind this. I mean, there would have to be multiple countries, or if not all countries, in on it. And but that made me think of something else, which was if you used to be that if you looked up what countries weren't a part of the World Bank, um, you used to be able to just say this to your phone. You could say, what countries aren't a part of the World Bank, which is Rockefeller's bank, and or maybe it's Rothschild. Um, and it used to be like 10 or 12 countries, and it was Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Libya, Somalia, North Korea, Cuba, and more recently, it's been narrowed way down. And it's only three countries, which are Cuba, North Korea, and Iran. So it would imply that at least every government in the world would be on it except those three, and and that they're probably going to be going to war with them soon, and that this has always been about something bigger than oil, but more along the lines of this kind of thing, where it's a complete enslavement of the human race, and the unwilling implantation of technology into people's bodies, and without their consent, and that's being done, and the intentional murder of a large segment of the population, and done by people who by their very nature are on the other side of this and are not affected. And the other thing, I mean, I'm just throwing out these random things in a way, but he also made a point at the guy that was saying this thing about nanobots, that he said, did you notice how fast the Chinese had the code up on the NIH website? And he was implying that they had the vaccine for this before it was ever released, and that and that would mean that if there was a plant microorganism like this for depopulation, you would want to have the vaccine first, and you would want to provide that to the people you wanted to make sure survived, and then they would be immune essentially from a threat of actually being sick, and nobody would know, and that would be that would then imply that the reason that isn't being made available to the general public is because they don't necessarily want you to survive, and so yeah, so maybe we could cut to like picture, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7.
Okay, so we'll go to picture, which one first, 6 or 7?
6, yeah, 6.
Okay, so for now we're going to picture 6 to show the audience.
Mm-hmm. So that's another one sort of showing shape. I like the diagram at the very top best. There's a tennis ball on the right, and that's going down towards the left to a grain of salt, and then a cell, and then a virus, which is another capsule with particles inside, and then DNA, and then protein, and then glucose. So again, the idea would be that they've made things that are so small that they could actually somehow either be put on the outside of this or inside of it, and that those little tiny particles would be self-replicating, meaning that once they're inside you, they somehow are able to to assemble themselves. And I'm breaking now so that we can jump to a clip.
Okay.
There were two that
So
I think would be
we just
good.
showed the audience 6, and you want me to show them 7 as well before we go to a clip?
Sure.
Okay, so I'm going to show here's 7 that he was talking about as well. Picture 7.
Okay.
And we're gonna take a break. We'll be back.
So now let's move on to smart dust.
This powder-sized chip, and that's a salt crystal, so this is a small thing, is something called the Mu chip from Hitachi. It's the smallest commercially available RFID system in the world, and can be pulse-powered by radio waves. It doesn't require a battery. You can literally scatter this stuff like dust, or embed it into a sheet of paper. And you know what the really interesting thing about this technology is? This was commercially released 10 years ago. So, the inevitability of smart dust. So what is smart dust? Well, smart dust, of course, isn't a new concept. It originated with DARPA back in the 90s. And it's general purpose computing, sensors, wireless networking, all bundled up into millimeter scale sensor modes, drifting in the air currents, flecks of computing power settling on your skin, ingested, monitoring you inside and out.
But in the future, every square inch of every city will be alive with intelligence. Because every street and every building will have a network of microcomputers built right into them. Dr. Chris Piester calls it smart dust.
A smart dust particle, or mote, is a wireless sensor with sensing, computation, communication, and power in one package.
These all-in-one microcomputers will be small, very small.
I need to back up a bit. There is another subject I need to broach above and beyond the ufology subject that I got involved with that relates to this when we talk about alternative government control mechanisms. In that one of my favorite hobbies has always been tracking new technologies, and hopefully so it benefits in business. And in '79, living and working in Denver, I came across a company that, if necessary, I can provide documents for, that I've kept on file, of a company in North Glen, Colorado, which is a northern suburb of Denver, was developing an implantable chip originally for horses, because was a major problem then, and it may be still today, of shilling of horses. You would have two horses that look alike, and you would put the dog in, and you'd bet against him when everybody thinks it's the fast one. Or you'd reverse that and bet against him. And he was attempting, through good faith, to develop a technology to give a unique signature to every single horse. That pill, if you want to call it that, intelligent pill, at the time was already small enough by then to implant under the skin with a horse needle, a large hypodermic needle. And I was shown these, and they worked. And we could read them with a primitive hand wand type reader from about 7 or 8 feet away. And this was still primitive technology. Excuse me. Now, at the time in the security industry, a lot of us had a lot of concerns about tracking and locating people that had been kidnapped, particularly what was going on in Europe at the time, where we were having NATO officers, even the Prime Minister of Italy, kidnapped. And these people were drained, or they were brutalized, or both. And one of the goals of the industry was to develop technology that would allow us to track these people or locate them quickly, hopefully to save their lives, but on a secondary basis to keep them from being drained of sensitive information. And I brought this technology to a meeting in a skiff room in Virginia that was arranged by a friend of mine with the CIA and another friend of mine with the State Department at the time, to introduce this technology to what we felt at the time were the right parties to use this new technology responsibly. Now, I hadn't heard about the remnant or any other religious beliefs at the time that said that everybody was going to be implanted with some sort of marking system, la the Beast or 666. I wasn't even aware of that stuff at the time. What bothered me was that the professor all of a sudden got a giant grant. The technology was transferred. He never had to work again the rest of his life. And a friend of mine in San Francisco, who I had quietly told about this technology, because he was involved with other aspects of national security and tracking people, he got a project to do a physical security system, access control, cameras, intrusion monitoring, everything, the works, for a little company in Silicon Valley. And he said it was eerie to him, but what they were making there looked eerily like what I had described to him. He built the security system in this modern fab, building billions of these little chips. He wound up a year later being asked if he'd want to buy the security system back. They were shutting the factory down after they'd made billions and billions of these little chips. And it was a division of a rather major European electronics firm that had the plant.
Which one?
Siemens. And what concerned me was that they had built these chips, and who knows what happened to them. And they built them in the billions in volume, because they're so small that you can take a 6-inch wafer and make hundreds of thousands of them on a wafer. And they disappeared somewhere. But in the process, what concerned me more was Bob did not give up trying to find out who these guys were and who they worked for, what their agendas were. He and I had had long talks now by the mid-'80s about what was really going on in government, who was controlling what concerns he had, because he had come to the realization there were a lot of things going on that weren't right. And he had supposedly made some contacts to find out more of what was going on. And he had contacted our mutual friend at CIA, another long-term contractor, been involved since World War II, in the very founding of the CIA, who got in touch with me and said, Bob's got something hot, and when he's back in the country again on business, we're going to get a meeting. A few days later, Bob was on his way to work just after dropping the 2 boys off at a private high school, I believe, in Nairobi. He was on the way to the embassy. And he was broadsided at a stoplight at 60 miles an hour by a reinforced Land Rover. He was killed instantly. The Brit that supposedly was drunk at 6 in the morning, 7 in the morning, was taken to the hospital and immediately disappears. And all the evidence he had given in the way of documentation was proven to be phony as to who he was, and Bob was killed. And it was a hit. And it's always concerned me today that he had gotten a little too close to who had been involved with this implantable chip technology. We'd been trying to, for a couple of years then, quietly trying to find out who had been doing it without our government realizing it was going on. Because whoever it is has got total ability to penetrate anytime, anywhere, our government, and locate what is going on instantly.
Who do you think they are?
Research since the early 80s on my own and with some friends indicates that we have at least 4 power groups in the world. They have wealth beyond all imagination. They have advanced technologies. They have taken over various programs, particularly black programs, within our government and probably even the Russian government and the Chinese. Their politics to them, as we know it, is not the same. And they have agendas totally unlike what our governments, we perceive our government's agendas really are. And that they are able to track unbelievably what's going on around them at a minute level. And who these people are, my friends and I have given them names, but they have no relevance to what they call themselves. We just simply call them the 4 horsemen. And that these horsemen work together at times, and they work against each other at times. There's an ongoing battle between them at a low level to who's going to be top dog in the world. The one commonality to all 4 appears to be an absolute desire for control of everything and everything. And that some of them have different bases for this. From the point of view of it, each of them has their own philosophy. And that core root philosophy guides them supposedly in their actions. And We believe that this is what was causing a lot of strange things to happen in Nevada that we were experiencing, and it, and in on a strange way, correlates also with what happened with these implantable chip technologies that I personally brought, now I look at it, to the wrong people in the government. Because we never got to use that technologies for what it was, we really intended it to be used for.
What do you think, these two men who came to the meeting, what credentials did they show to get in? I mean, what did they have? Were they FBI or were they?
Above and beyond that, they were NSA, NRO, that sort of credentials. But we would later check and they didn't exist. They did not exist. Yet their credentials were spotless. Even to the point where if it was an access control requirement, the identification systems that they carried passed all the access control mechanism requirements we had, be it biometric, be it fingerprint, be it eyeball, be it anything, even to access code numbers. They knew it all. They had it all. And it was better quality than actually what the agencies had, which is most enlightening. It means unlimited budgets.
Where I am with this in terms of my thoughts is that I'm seeing this virus and it develops over time, and it potentially has these horrendous features and maybe intentions behind it, and I'm willing to entertain all ideas, and I don't assume that at this point that anything's too crazy to be true, and I don't know what the truth is, and I'm, as you yourself, I think, have stated, I'm searching the truth, and that is what I think the viewers also are after. And so really what I'm presenting are different possibilities, but there's a certain amount of evidence for this, and the whole thing is strange. But so it's this virus, and it's spreading apparently, and it's not clear yet how devastating it will be in terms of deaths and the economy, because it's still unfolding, and I think it's just starting to break out in some of the more highly populated and least advanced continents like Africa and India. I mean, it's going to do a lot of damage there, potentially, and then to throw salt in the wound, it potentially could have nanotechnology in it too, and have been intended to collapse the economy. And so that maybe is is where it's time to kind of change the conversation a little and lead into the idea of intent and the idea of there being what's going on in the world, and is there a group that's trying to do these kinds of things, and who might they be? But let's just do that. Let's just do that clip now.
And you're talking about specifically, was it an MIT clip you wanted me to show the audience? And you're talking about specifically, was it the MIT clip that you want me to show the audience next?
Yeah, the MIT clip at 1912.
So I like to think of kind of the age that we currently live in as the bioatomic age, which means that we now have a conception of living things as a physical continuity from the atom to the organism. Doesn't mean that we understand all of it, but we don't think that there's any kind of missing magical physical forces or chemical reactions that need to be discovered in some sense in order to explain the biological phenomenon. But the complexity of the study is such that physics on one end is typically formulaic. You can write it out as a mathematical equation. The complexity the chemistry adds is combinatorics. You just take, let's say, the 6 most common elements that we're made out of and make small molecules synthetically, and that universe of compounds is 10 to the 60th power. There are 10 to the 60th different molecules that you can make potentially that contain the elements that we're made out of. And that's more than I think the number of stars in the universe, and at least. So the complexity is very high in terms of the combinatorics, but in fact evolution changes these molecules in dramatic ways because the molecules that exist in biology have evolved. And so they're not just built from the bottom up, they're built from the top down. In other words, these molecules have responded to the environment in a certain way such that they got selected as part of this living thing.
And there are multiple different ways to look at that. You had mentioned yourself when we started talking today that sort of the idea that some of these things are false flags and aren't really happening at all. The idea that this isn't a virus and that there's something else going on, in which case there isn't a virus spreading. So in a way that would be a good thing, but then obviously there'd have to be something else incredibly major happening to have the powers that be shut down the economies and for them to be willing to do that in every country virtually around the world at the same time.
I wasn't actually suggesting that there was no virus at all. I was only asking your opinion on if you thought that maybe they were exaggerating. Let's see my note. If they were exaggerating the severity and the deadliness, but certainly, I'm on the same page as everyone else where this does look real. And then whenever I was referencing some of the shootings and stuff that have involve a FEMA drill or a FEMA active shooter drill scam, most of them it seems have a drill, and then following the drill there is a real shooting. So there's only a couple that look like they could have been completely all crisis actors and stuff. But just to clarify that.
Okay. Yeah, and I think a lot of the population looks at things nowadays sort of through similar point of view, where they doubt that what they're being told is the truth, to the point of thinking that the whole thing is not true and that there isn't a virus. And I've seen out there people saying, is it a meteor that's going to hit the planet? Is it a comet? Is it this or that? And I guess you can just entertain all sorts of possibilities. But
well, Jupiter protects us.
Jupiter, yeah, that's right.
For the most part, Jupiter will protect us from comets, for example, just because of its great mass and its tremendous gravitational pull, and its proximity to the Earth. What'll happen? This, according to researcher Graham Hancock. I covered a little bit of it in a video, but he was talking about how anything that comes too close to the Earth, Jupiter will pull it right in and just doesn't, demolish it, because it's just that big and strong. So that's kind of reassuring. Certainly, there's a chance that something could make it through.
Right. Yeah, well, and I think you're right. It does tend to protect us. Then again, the story of the end of the dinosaurs is that we were hit by a meteor, so they don't all get taken out by Jupiter. And so that would be an idea that it could be a cover for something else that's as or more serious than the virus. But I like you, I think that there actually is a virus spreading around, and if anything, I tend to think that it's worse than they're telling people, and I tend to think that they intentionally let it get a foothold before they did the things that now are supposedly intended to reduce the overburden of the medical system. And that's a jump. It could be that they're just humans and they were in a hard position and don't have experience dealing with a pandemic, which I don't think any living person has ever been through anything like this before. So you gotta cut the government a little bit of slack, and also they do have to worry about the economy. Inconsequential. and it potentially weakens a country, it makes it more vulnerable to attack. And but how about could we switch to another picture?
Yeah, you want me to show a picture?
Yes, actually, if you go above what we were calling number up to that Illuminati card game screenshot that I sent,
Which picture number?
it would be above number 1. We
Okay.
didn't give it a number.
Let me make sure I find it so I can show the audience.
Okay.
Oof. I'm having trouble navigating through all this stuff.
Yeah, it's a lot.
And it's above all of the
So
pictures?
Yep, and it's above that Kennedy speech, and then there's like 3 9/11 or 4 9/11 videos. It's right above that. It's the screenshot, and it shows the quarantine card and the other card.
Oh, Illuminati.
Yep.
Okay, I found it.
Yeah. So
I'll show that to the audience. It looks
Okay.
like was this part of a conversation you had with somebody in Discord?
No.
Because I see
No, that's just a screenshot from that video I sent you that you were calling the Alex Jones video.
Okay. But you do want me to blow that up and show everyone that, or do you want me to trim it down to just the cards?
You can trim it down to just the cards. Say, I was just trying to show those cards because I know what that's from.
You want to talk about that now a little bit?
Mm-hmm. That's my thought. Yeah, to kind of go into the Illuminati stuff and the idea. And I think you have some knowledge on that kind of thing, don't you?
Yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Illuminati. I approach it from a different perspective than most people, and kind of from a different view.
Right.
And I always want to kind of preface any time that I'm referencing the Illuminati, because it's such a misunderstood subject. I like to begin by saying that I'm very careful when I'm generalizing not to villainize an entire family or an entire class, whether it be the rich or the poor. Both will have good and bad, and you can find great diversity and differences among families. And I've noticed that with the Illuminati, they tend to label anyone that's elite or rich Illuminati, and also they tend to label certain families, entire families, and we're not going to mention, I won't mention them, you can if you want, but I won't mention them. They try to label entire families Illuminati, and that's just not the way it works. There's a great deception used through mind control. There's two Illuminatis: the fake Illuminati that most people think is the Illuminati, and the real Illuminati. There are two ideas of a one world order by the fake Illuminati and a spiritually united world. Let me say that again. There are two ideas of a one world order by the fake Illuminati, referring to it as a one world order, and a spiritually united world by the real Illuminati. So there's similarities, but they're kind of polar opposites when you look closely at them. The real Illuminati is based on enlightenment, morality, and motivated by spiritual entities. The fake satanic Ahrimanic Illuminati is very dark and immoral, motivated by materialistic entities. And there are two narratives. One narrative has humanity becoming bionic, cyborg slaves, which is the plan of the fake materialistic Illuminati. The QAnon narrative, which I'm not saying I know a lot about QAnon, I don't, but I will say that the QAnon narrative says the leaders of the shadow government and deep state are already being arrested and will end up in Guantanamo Bay-like prisons. And it may be that the recent reports of increased firearms sales are true, and people are waking up and preparing to exercise their Second Amendment right, if necessary. Although I don't get the feel yet it will be. That right was given to us by the Founding Fathers with the idea that we, the people, are to remain the true government and to protect ourselves from tyranny.
So, can I ask you two questions so far?
Yes.
Well, the first one would be in terms of the two Illuminatis, are they both equally powerful in terms of influencing the world?
No, they're not. Everything has become materialistic, Ahrimanic, and satanic. And so right now, that's why we're seeing the things that we're seeing, and we're facing the challenges that we're facing. However, that would be the fake Illuminati that most people associate as the Illuminati or think of as the Illuminati. It's a great deception, like I said. However, the good news is there is a real Illuminati, and it's the opposite. It's based on spirituality instead of materialism, and it is much more powerful. And everything has a season, and everything has a reason.
Got it.
There were reasons. Yeah. There were reasons why materialism had to sort of spread and become like it is. But now things are becoming different. There are reasons now where that's going to have to end, and we're going to see things changing. That I can promise.
The second question I had was you were talking about people maybe buying firearms and waking up to exercise their Second Amendment rights, which I assume you mean to resist tyranny and to stay free and protect the Constitution. And I've heard that kind of assertion or into that idea before. Who would it be you would think that they would use hypothetically their Second Amendment rights against in today's setting in America? I've always kind of had a hard time with that. Like, who would they be fighting? Would it be the U.S. Army? Would it be the current elected government? Would it be a particular party? Would it be their neighbors? Would it be like, who is it they would even... I've just never understood who it is that somebody could even fight against at this point.
So to make sure I understand your question, what you're saying is if the people did have to exercise their right and stand up against tyranny, which was what the Founding Fathers gave us, the tool to do through the Second Amendment, who would they be fighting?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'll answer that in sort of an expanded narrative or manner. And so this country, when we gained our independence from, if you look at history, I love history, and when we gained our independence from England, the British Empire, it was done with the early Continental Army under George Washington, and it was largely made up of these militias. So we have the right to form militias, and there are people that in the military and in the government and stuff like that are caught in stuff that they don't believe in, but they need to pay their bills. They need to feed their family, but they don't believe in it. They don't like it. And there is a sort of a division within the government, within the military, within intelligence, and morale has been hurt. So everybody isn't on board with all these things, and I do think that there is a distinctive deep state and a distinctive shadow government,
Okay.
and it would
So
be,
I guess,
yeah,
so you're saying that there'd be kind of a split in the government, and then the population would maybe take sides in that.
yes, and so the population, I think, would largely be would stand up against the tyranny and reclaim its right as the government. We the people are the government, you know, ourselves for the people. You look at Washington, George Washington as an example, and there's always going to be a leader or leaders who will rise up and overcome adversity when the time, you know, right when it's needed. So, and then from a spiritual, from the perspective of spiritual science, which is one of my current full-time areas of study, there is good news. Everything, including artificial intelligence, is related to spirit in some way. Through spiritual development, healthy and loving thoughts and feelings, and clean living, every obstacle can be overcome, including nanobots and viruses. The problem is we live in, like I was saying before, an extremely materialistic world where even all the mainstream religions have become more and more materialistic and have moved further and further away from their spiritual essence. But I guarantee you, and I promise you, we're slowly starting to see that change. That's going to be changing, where people are able to find their spiritual nature and the spiritual essence of themselves.
Yeah, well, that's a positive message in a ray of, and the way you described the potential of a new revolution that's the most logical explanation I've heard. I've always had a question. There's a lot of times people, I feel, indicate, people preparing to defend their liberties, but it's never clear how they're going to do that. To me, it's like, who is it that, because things aren't, in a way, these days, George Washington, that example, that's what occurred to me. It was more black and white because it was George Washington was wearing blue, and and the British were red.
Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. So I guess what I was getting at is, to me, the revolution was clear in terms of which side, and nowadays it could be. I mean, the way you're describing it sounds black and white, that there'd be one group fighting against a dark Illuminati agenda of, I think, mind control and the elimination of representation for people's rights and freedoms, and instead what seems to be happening now, which is a country that the government represents corporations and only stands up for the corporate freedoms and interests, and it is enslaving the population and making them powerless under that system. That's how I see it. And so if there was a group that basically said, screw this, we're not gonna go along with this, I think there would be a big chunk of the population that would be behind that. And there probably would be some that wouldn't be, and that's the way it always works. And yeah, I don't know, you mentioned Antifa and stuff like that. I don't know. I mean, in a way, that means anti-fascist, and I would see fascism as being on the side of the deep state and sort of the hyper patriotism. In other words, you better not question anything we do because we've got the flag behind us, and I see that as sort of a deep state tactic of taking away your freedom, and you're kind of so busy, standing up and saluting the flag at the football game that you don't even notice that that's all become now symbolic for something that no longer exists. But there's different takes on that, and I agree with you. I think a lot of the political stuff nowadays is a show, and it is probably set up by actors, and it would be easy to do things like that. And I don't think there's actually been a functioning democracy in America for quite some time, certainly back before the last president. I don't know exactly where it would have started, but I think maybe it kind of crept into existence over the years, and it would include even back when Bill Clinton was a president. I mean, most of his things like the NAFTA agreement, although I would say that that is a pro-corporate decision and an anti-democracy, anti-protection of individual people. And I think that what was in existence, at least before this time, was what's called a. Are you still there, by the way? I can't tell if.
Yeah.
But there's a name for something which, and I'm kind of switching things real quick, but it's called inverted totalitarianism, which means a country that's run by corporations, and it gives the illusion of a functioning democracy. So it would imply that you would still have elections, and you'd still have these news briefings, and you'd still have the illusion that there are these people that are there to represent you and they're trying to protect you. But under that philosophy, that would kind of say that no, that's all a stage show. It's all that they're the actors, they're the crisis actors, if you will.
You're right, though. We're going to need a reformed system because economy has to be separated from government, and religion does as well, and they're not right now, and that's going to have to change.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And so one thing I thought of with this coronavirus, though, is that it's kind of the inverted totalitarianism coming out of the closet. And they're now just being open about the fact that you're ruled. And, and pretty soon they won't even bother having a Republican and Democratic Party. They'll just have a king and their subjects. And it'll be like, look, the corporations decide how the government works, who's in it, what their positions are. You don't even have to vote anymore. Just pay your taxes and shut up, or else we'll come and kill you. And that's kind of what it's coming down to. And it's always kind of shocked me that we are the descendants of George Washington, and how much people are sort of tolerating it. I would say that the American Revolution that George Washington led was done over much smaller issues than what people are now tolerating in their lives as modern Americans. And I understand it's different. I mean, it wouldn't be easy to to resist at this point, but it is. I agree with you. I think it's really become screwed up.
No, they're cowardly. The people in I always referred to them as cowardly. The people in the shadow government and the deep state, they're certainly hiding. They hide what they do, and they know that they have to. They know what would happen if the stuff that they do came to light. And it's always reminded me of the Wizard of Oz. When you finally get to the castle, and he's just a coward hiding behind a curtain. When all along they thought that it was this great and powerful wizard, and he's just some feeble, weak guy working levers behind a curtain.
Right. It's a good analogy. Yeah, I like that movie.
I wanted to talk about the mind control a little bit more at some point when you're finished.
Okay. I'm finished. Yeah.
And the school shooting in Parkland, Florida, had Nikolas Cruz. I watched them interrogate him, and he exhibited 100% all the characteristics of someone mind controlled through MK Ultra style mind control. Now, I'm only going to talk about some of this stuff for the audience because some people don't believe in it. But I promise you, if you look at these things, for example, if you watch the Nikolas Cruz interview, I mean, this kid's messed up bad, and it's clear right in the interview.
Mm-hmm.
And then with Las Vegas shootings, Laura Loomer interviewed a Michaela who described Paddock as mind controlled. Supposedly Michaela didn't exist, and everyone says Laura Loomer was a big liar. Well, Michaela was certain they would try to kill her because of what she knew. When the Supreme Court forced the LVMPD to release body cam evidence, we heard them in the Mandalay Bay control room talking about evacuating a Michaela. And there's evidence that the Vegas Harvest Festival shootings was yet another FEMA active shooter drill scam. Both Wolfgang Halbert and myself have demonstrated how, according to the FEMA manual itself, in order for the participating state to qualify for the federal funding, it must be a community event affecting the entire community. A FEMA drill also explains the dummies, strobe lights, and crisis actors. What they do is a drill that involves a real shooting at the end or shortly after. Dean Ryan, investigative journalist for Truth Be Told Radio, was in Vegas investigating after the shooting and spoke to witnesses of the FEMA drill, people that actually witnessed the FEMA drill. And the documents dug up by Laura Loomer included a FEMA drill document. The FEMA drill scam is an unconstitutional gun control legislation scam. The FEMA manual also says CEOs and the like need to be involved, hence the insider trading and foreknowledge of James Murin and company during that shooting. Saudi Prince Salman was probably transported away from the scene via a helicopter, but so were the shooters. So I don't believe that all of the shooting into the crowd were assassination attempts on the prince, who wasn't even in the crowd, but reportedly on a top floor of the Mandalay Bay. If nanobot weapon viruses are the new way they're doing mind control, that could explain the reports of Paddock being mind controlled in light of him allegedly suffering from mental health issues, allergies, and his desire to keep clean. Paddock has been described as suffering from germophobia, although I would take anything Mary Lou Danley says with a grain of salt. I also agree with John Lear that the body wasn't Paddock. There's no evidence he died. In fact, people talk about a video showing Paddock alive a couple days later at a casino. I also agree with John Lear and others that Paddock was working for one of the intelligence communities, possibly in a private capacity as a contractor. And Sirhan, the alleged assassin of Robert Kennedy, tried to enter a guilty plea that was rejected by a judge who believed he was under the influence of mind control. People can look that up. That's a fact. How long do you think this method of using nanobots for mind control has been going on?
Well, yeah, that I have no idea. And for that matter, I don't know for sure that it is going on, but that's a good question. And you know, I don't know that anybody would be able to tell you that would be allowed to talk, and I don't know. But that's a good question, and that is some of the descriptions of people who allegedly are under the influence of this. In fact, there are one of the Robert Duncan interviews that we can cut to in a minute, maybe for a brief second, is they're talking about two particular people in two particular cases where apparently there was one of them was, I think, district attorney. You know, so he was a lawyer and a fairly reputable higher role in society, and the other one I don't remember what the person's employment was, but these were two cases where the people over the period of a year had apparently complained to the FBI and to authorities that they were being targeted for mind control and that they were having violent thoughts, and both of those people did commit mass shootings and were killed in those shootings themselves. I would potentially these mass shooters are doing the same thing. That there is through mind control, they can create some of these shootings from people that legitimately are doing them, and that there is this deeper intent behind that. And whether it goes beyond that, whether they can control one person and get them to do a mass shooting, then can they control, you know, a group of people or a country? I mean, who knows what the potential of something like that would be, and that's where it gets kind of scary. it's not like it was a year ago when you would just listen to a conspiracy theory discussion, if you will, like you and I are having. I mean, a lot of people will label it that way. And then you turn off your TV or your iPad or your phone and you go back to normal. Well, now you can't do that because normal is this viral pandemic and everybody's living in it. And does this have something to do with all the things we just talked about? And if it does, what is their intent? And is it the dark Illuminati, as you put it, that is satanic and negative and after materialistic control of people and potentially depopulation? It certainly doesn't have the feel of being something that is along the lines of the spiritually illuminated Illuminati, which I assume is where the word Illuminati comes from, illumination, to enlighten. All of that seems positive, and to there isn't the feel right now of there being an evolution of humanity, more that it's going in the other direction. But as you said, is it possible that this is required to wake people up and to turn things around and to have humanity maybe unlock its power and its ability through psychic powers and spirituality, and maybe even involving aliens and in a bigger universe that we are a part of, but it's been kept secret from us, maybe even involving our true origins and our soul origins, and that, so there is some positive things potentially. There is this shift in the timeline of the human race, and will it go in a positive way and will it go in a negative? And even along that, I hear slightly different things. You seem really confident that the good things were coming, and I hope that you're right. And
well, so is John Lear.
And so is John Lear.
Well, he says the ET made us, and ET's not, didn't go through all that trouble of making us, that they're going to let half the population die. The only difference between he and I are I'm a little more spiritual, and what he refers to as ET, I refer to as spiritual entities that we can connect to them through positive thoughts and positive feelings and stuff like that, and they will help us and guide us through.
Yeah, and that's cool. And I think it's also possible though that that's all true, but that there's something else on the other side, which is that the other side has aliens too.
Oh yeah.
And so then it becomes less clear what the outcome will be, and that's where you start to maybe understand what's meant when people give when they allude to a spiritual war, a war between black and dark, or between darkness and light. That this isn't just the human good and bad, and it's also the alien good and bad, and that's where it potentially has this feel of it being a six-dimensional chess game, that it's in.
Now you did cut out on me. After six-dimensional chess game. We'll take a break. We'll be right back, folks.
Sorry, did I cut off?
Okay, welcome back to the show.
Darn it, that was like a good part, and I was...
You were the last thing you said was you cut out right after six-dimensional chess game.
Okay, yeah, well, it has the air of this 16-dimensional chess game, and if there's not only good and bad humans and powerful organizations like a good Illuminati and a bad Illuminati, that's complicated enough, and a lot of that stuff is being done potentially in the shadows and behind lies and cover-ups, and that by itself is hard for a public to deal with. But then if you add in that the good Illuminati has good aliens with it and the bad Illuminati has bad aliens with it, that makes it even more complicated, because then you're not just dealing with the human motivations are, but with what the alien motivations are.
Not to sound mean, but the according to spiritual science, the bad ones are what could be referred to as retarded entities that were held back.
yeah, not as evolved maybe, or
Yeah, and so they're more limited, and but yeah, though certainly like John Lear's talked about, there is a war going on, and like you're talking about as well, and it is real.
yeah. Yeah, and it's fascinating, but I guess it's also serious, and maybe it's time to get the public involved in that to pick sides and help. And I think most people right now aren't even aware that ideas like this exist. And so, is that something that's going to happen? Is there going to be a awakening and an enlightenment, or is there going to be like this nanotechnology that will sort of take over without you knowing it, and you'll never have an opportunity to ever realize what happened? And that I don't know. I hope that the side of light prevails, and maybe that's part of why you and I are doing this interview, is to make more people aware of.
Have you heard about the Nordics that supposedly live at Area 51? They have like a whole section of the desert.
Well, I don't know if I've heard that particular. I've heard of Nordics. That's a type of alien, the
tall
tall
whites.
blondes. Yeah,
Yeah.
tall whites.
Yeah.
And oftentimes within these categories, you'll get completely different stories about whether they're good or whether they're bad. But yeah, I have heard of the Nordics.
Interesting, huh?
Yeah, it is. It's fascinating.
Supposedly
It's all
they
fascinating.
have a weapon that they carry. It's similar to a almost looks like a pen or a pencil, and this thing will just zap a person and just almost
Really?
like, yeah, and kill them instantly.
Huh. Well, it makes sense that this, if there's an alien that's like, well, think of the technology we have, and think of what we would have if we survived another billion years. And that potentially is what you're interacting with an alien, and it's hard to even imagine what that might be, and it's hard to imagine what their technology might be and what their motivations might be.
Are you familiar with Dan Burrish?
No, I don't. That doesn't sound familiar.
Dan Burrish worked at I believe at one or more of the top secret bases. I believe it was Area 51, and he worked with a alien that I believe they called it the one. This is the one that they called J-Rod or something like that.
Oh yeah, that I have heard.
And according to Burrish apparently tried to help this thing escape, because with the way that it's reported that they treat these beings is horrible. They keep them captive and try to extract information out of them to be able to use that information for reverse engineering and communications with other similar beings, and to navigate the ships or something along those lines. So he tries to help this being escape. Now the interesting thing is, according to Burrish, and I tend to agree with him, some of these beings that people think of as alien, and certainly they've make the claim themselves to people who are psychically able to communicate with them, is that they're actually humans from the future, time travelers.
Wow. Yeah, that's wild, isn't it?
But
a wild idea.
Yeah, and certainly from a spiritual, scientific perspective, we are all related. We're all related.
Right.
Everything is related, at least to my understanding, at least in the Milky Way galaxy.
Right. Well, that makes sense. Maybe even the whole universe. And if these ideas of source energy and universal energy is true, then it would mean that everything's related. And I guess that's where the saying comes from. I don't know if I can say it exactly, but that as you do unto the least of thee is as you do unto me. The idea that the way you treat the worst treatment that you give to anyone is how you treat God, because that person is a part of God. It's a part of source energy. It's a part of you. And that changes maybe how you look at things like imprisonment and war, because it means that you're shooting yourself and you're locking yourself up, and and you're doing that to God, and it changes the perspective on a lot of things potentially, and I think that would be a good thing for humanity to head towards, is being more humane that way, and that sounds like maybe what the true Illuminati would do. And
Oh
it
yeah.
sounds like, and that's definitely not what the one that's running the world right now is doing.
I've seen authentic video of a what people would call an alien held captive at one of the secret bases, and it was horrifying to watch. Very sad. And I watched them do an interview with the being, and then later there was a gentleman that talked about the interview, and he was saying that this being was like a really good being that actually emitted light, like its own light from itself, and it was pretty interesting, and that maybe that's why their eyes were all black, because of their anatomy or something like that.
Yeah, I would have to assume that there'd be really different ways that things would appear physically, and that there'd be perfectly reasonable explanations, but from a human perspective, it might be frightening sometimes. But again, that's not. I think you and I were talking about this last time. That's not the person. That's not the, if you will, or the alien. The alien is the mind. It's not the body. And and I don't know that there's any evidence that I'm aware of that they've overtly done something to the overall population. Now, is there something alien involved with this virus? I mean, I don't know. And is there an alien side that's going to help with it? Does this have something to do with that battle between light and darkness? I don't know. It certainly feels that way in a sense.
There is a hierarchy, and that perform different tasks according to spiritual science, and so there will be beings that will help humanity. And then, before I forget, I did want to ask you a quick question. Professor Boyle pointed out that keeping 6 feet away from people refers to the distance that these nanobots can fly. It certainly doesn't refer to the distance a person can sneeze, which is up to about 12 feet. For a microscopic robot, 6 feet must be somewhat of a fair distance in comparison to us. Any thoughts on that?
Well, all I can tell you is what I know. Where the 6 feet comes from is that generally the virus is in actual droplets of saliva or mucus, and that generally they can travel 6 feet. So someone, generally, if they cough or even sneeze, relatively safe distance would be. I mean, I maybe you want to be further away than that. I think where it's coming from is that someone just talking to you that's closer than 6 feet can be spraying droplets of saliva on you, and you wouldn't be aware of it. And those droplets could have virus in them, and if the virus has nanotechnology in it, then it's all kind of one package. So yes, that's where the 6 feet comes from, is that when you're closer to than that, people's spit can actually be sprayed out and be on you, and the virus can live on surfaces apparently for days. And so let's say they're talking to you and you're at Lowe's or at the grocery store and you're buying a loaf of bread and you're talking to the person behind you and they're spraying saliva on your shirt, and then you go home and you take it off, and your kid, picks it up, and then they've got it on their hand, and then they rub their eye, and then they get it, and then maybe they don't get sick because it doesn't affect kids, but they're shedding virus, and you take them to go visit grandma, and then grandma doesn't know it, but there's virus in the air, and grandma gets it and dies. And so that's the idea, is that you want to try to prevent the things that are known to spread viruses, which would be generally the what did I say? The droplets. So you want to stay further than 6 feet away. But then also once you touch those droplets, so if you go out to the store and you touch a keypad or you touch anything, it's so easy to get these microscopic things on your hand, and so you have to assume every time you touch anything in public that you're contaminated and it's on your hand, and anything you touch after that you can transfer the virus to. So if you touch your cell phone and then you wash your hands and then you get in your car and then you grab your phone and then you've recontaminated yourself. So the more you can kind of be conscious of that, the better. You want to use hand sanitizer frequently, never touch your face, never eat anything until you wash your hands. Soap actually is a pretty good thing to destroy the coating of the viruses, those capsules that we were showing. Soap destroys those. Those are made up of fats, and it'll disrupt that. So soap is actually a good way to clean your hands and the virus. And so being aware of that it is, if you go out in the public, you may be exposed to the virus and you won't know that it's there or where it is. And if you contract it, it might not even hurt you. It's more an issue of how you help spread it through your interactions then with other people, and then how they interact with other people, and so on and so forth. So the whole reason for the quarantine is to try to slow that down. And it's not because you're necessarily trying to keep people from ever getting it, because it may be impossible, but it's that if the rates increase too sharply, then the number of people that need medical intervention start to increase too sharply and the hospitals become overwhelmed. And then basically you need a ventilator and they don't have one.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Did you want me to show another clip?
Well, I was thinking we could, during like that conversation we were having about targeted individual. I keep getting off track here. There was the.
So we're going to show the audience a clip about getting back into the mind control about a targeted individual.
You're live.
Hello, my name is Tyrone Alexander Dew. I am the author of Satellite Directed Energy Weaponry Terrorism, Illuminati Got Me. It covers 30 years of my life of being a victim of satellite directed energy weaponry terrorism, the same crime that these young men tried to explain before the horrific end of their life. I don't know if you remember Aaron Alexis, September 16, 2013. He went to the Naval Yard where he worked at, and he murdered 12 people. After that, there was Myron May, a young successful trial attorney for the district attorney in New Mexico. He quit his job abruptly, went to Florida where he grew up at, went to Florida State where I believe he attended college, and shot 3 people. His suicide note mirrors the experiences that I wrote about. Today, there's only one guy in our lives that could actually explain what's going on with us, and his name is ex-CIA engineer, Dr. Robert Duncan. Can you please tell the people what we're complaining of?
Yes, I've worked on a lot of these technologies, and I have a non-disclosure agreement with the government, which I absolutely respect. I work for the on projects for the Department of Defense, CIA, Justice Department, on such things as writing the artificial intelligence code to triangulate on nuclear submarines, inner city gunshot fire, the EEG, control of robots, and the list goes on. But my recent research and my interest has been in 1,000 interviews that I have done to expose some crimes against humanity. And I've been collecting this data for over a decade, interviewing people like you to understand what are the methods of these no-touch brainwashing, mind control, and behavior modifications experiments that have come out of the CIA initially, that it was discovered on a project that's a very generic name. They keep changing project names, MK Ultra. And they also use stalking methods that were developed under the FBI called COINTELPRO, counterintelligence. And it's how to control groups and populations and people that may make more of an influence in social cohesion that they're targeting and interested in.
Well, the technologies that we're complaining of, actually they're putting voices into people's heads. That is what these young men were complaining about before they committed the crimes. Aaron Alexis, he felt as if he was being followed. Now, you might not understand this, but they're using something I believe called extreme low frequency waves. These extreme low frequency waves, once they put a voice in your head, they're able to cause pain. And if you understand how you know, that could affect you. You can't sit at work, you can't go to school, you can't do anything. Myra and May complained of the same thing, you know, and both of these young men were complaining of, they're trying to force me off my job, they're trying to scare me off my job, and they finally did that to them. So Duncan, can you explain how people are hearing voices in their mind? Or can you explain that can you at least admit that it's true that these technologies exist?
They absolutely exist.
Okay, welcome back. We're going on over 2 hours here, I think, at this point. I really enjoyed having you on again. Is there any more that you want to touch on or talk about before we wrap it up?
Well, I really enjoyed being on again, and it's been fun talking to you and hearing what you know and telling you what I've heard and what I know. I guess the final thing I'd say is just, you know, I hope that everyone is okay, and I would encourage you to take it seriously. The worst that happens if you do is that you spend a little more time at home, I guess, and the worst that happens if you don't is that you help the virus spread, which could then hurt somebody, and you wouldn't even know that had happened. And but I wish everyone the best, and I hope that we all get through this okay. And I encourage everybody to take time maybe away from this topic and to meditate and to think about their spirituality and who they are inside and to take care of that too. But that's it. So thank you.
Well, Doug, we really had a great conversation. We covered a lot tonight, and
we did.
I think that the audience will really appreciate it. It definitely should be an educational video to watch, and I really appreciated having you on. You have a lot of good information and just a wealth of knowledge.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you hosting me and you as well. You have a lot of knowledge and you do a good job of this. And so yeah, I hope that it helps somebody out there somehow. And yeah, so thank you.
Thank you. And if any more topics come up in the future as we move forward, or if there's anything else that you want to present on the show, or if I can, you know, if I think of anything like that, we definitely would love to have you on again.
Oh, cool. Well, thank you. And I'd love to be. And I think you can tell you and I could probably literally sit here if there wasn't like our mortality, like the limits of our mortality. We wonder how long we could keep going. We'd probably go from one thing to another to another to
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much.
Okay. Good night, and I look forward to seeing the video.
Okay, take care.
Okay, you too. Bye.